snack. Me and you gonna have a little chat about books. Hi guys, so I am here today to do a book review, and the book that I'm going to be reviewing is one of the books that I ended up reading as part of my read-along group on Goodreads that I host. I will put the link to that down below so you can go and join it if you want to. Next month we are planning to read Leviathan Wakes, so if that interests you then definitely go check that out. But the book that I'm going to be reviewing today is The Thousand Names by Django Wexler, which is the first one in the Shadow campaigns. I wasn't sure how I was going to feel about this book because I read Promise of Blood not that long ago by Brian McClellan, which is a Flintlock book, and this one is also described as a Flintlock book, and I wasn't the massive fan of Promise of Blood. There were cool elements to it that I liked, but I just didn't engage as much as I wanted to with the story or the characters. But this book, I'm happy to say, has renewed my interest in getting into more Flintlock fantasy, because this one I really did enjoy, and let's get into why. So I would give this book a solid 4.5 stars because it is a really interesting story. It starts off kind of slow. The pacing, it's not slow as in boring, it's slow as in it's building into something, and there's always something being built up to, so you get the feeling that as you work your way through the story, things are getting more intense and you're learning a lot more as you go through. Of course, as you would probably guess, this is quite a battle-heavy book. There is a lot of battling, there is a lot of warfare, there is a lot of marching and things like that. However, that is not a bad thing, and I, for one, am not a huge fan of battles and large-scale battles in particular, but this book does it really well, and I definitely felt so interested in it. Even though it's not something I'm passionate about, it was interesting to read about because Django Wexler, you can clearly see he has done his research and he has got it right. And I mean, I'm not an expert, but you can just tell reading his writing that he has definitely done his research, and it's clearly something that he's very passionate about, and the battles are very cohesively written, they're very clear, and you can instantly understand who is who and where they are and what they're doing in terms of the large battle and how they are affecting it. So I really enjoyed that. I definitely enjoyed seeing all of the regiments marching around and understanding what was going on, because that is my biggest problem with battle scenes, is that often you can get confused. This book, I didn't get confused. I found it very easy, and I would highly recommend it if you're not a big fan of battle scenes. This book does them very well, so that might be an entryway into books with more battle scenes. This book is a fantasy debut, I believe. It doesn't really feel like a debut fantasy just because he is a very good writer and it seems quite seamless. It doesn't have clunkiness or anything like that to it. It does feel quite straight to the point, and the characters and the storyline is quite easy to understand and connect with. So I feel like he's a very good writer, and this being his first adult fantasy, pretty good overall, I would say. There are a lot of moments where it's exciting, there's a lot of intrigue, there's a lot of mystery, and there's not actually a whole great amount of magic used within this book. It's kind of hinted at a lot and we see glimpses of it throughout the story, but it's not until the very end where everything kicks off and there's an explosive ending that we really get to see the full scale of magic. And I love the fact that Django Wexler decided to do that, because that means that when you do see magic, it's much more effective, it's much more vibrant, and you're sitting there going, oh my goodness, how much more can we take? What is going to happen next? This is all so cool and scary and terrifying, and I really enjoyed it. I definitely felt like the magic was interesting. We don't know a whole lot about it even now, but I'm really intrigued to find out more, because I have no doubt that the next few books are going to tell us a lot more. And there's due to be 5 books in this series. The second one is already out and the third one comes out this year, so I will definitely be picking up book 2 and 3 sometime later this year, but book 4 and 5 will be out in coming years, I'm sure. And I'm very excited about it. The story itself has kind of 2 main storylines and then a subplot where we're following a whole different load of characters. The prologue of this book, I will say, the prologue of this book is a bit confusing and you're kind of thrown in the deep end and you don't really know what's going on. The prologue is quite short and it's quite easy to get through, even though you feel like you don't understand what's happening. I would say that the prologue does become clear over the course of the book, so even if you don't understand where it is going or what it's about at the beginning, you will by the end of the book, and you'll get more interested, and that's not the main storyline. So if you've ever started this book and not really known where it's going or been put off by the prologue, then yes, it is confusing, but it's easy to get through and then you get on to the main storylines, which are really, really interesting. So, as I say, we have two main storylines. First, we have Winter, who is a young soldier in the Vordenite army, and then we have Marcus, who is a commanding officer within the Vordenite army. They don't actually know each other specifically as characters, but they are serving the same purpose. They work for the king, and they are trying to defeat the Kandarians. The Kandarians and the Vordenite had a pretty good relationship until not that long ago, and then they started fighting one another for various reasons that you find out throughout the book, and we are following the Vordenite troops as they are essentially trying to defeat the Kandarians. One thing I really liked about having two different characters in the same place was that they have different ranking authority, which means that you see different areas of the army from the point of view of Marcus, who is much higher up and doesn't necessarily know all of the lower grumbling that's going on in the lower ranks, and he gets to know all of the plans of what they're going to do and things like that, so that was really interesting. Whereas Winter is a much lower soldier and doesn't get to know as much of what is going on the overall picture, is very much a member of the army and just has to do what she's told, so that was really enjoyable to read about their different perspectives. Marcus himself is a high up commander, but he is tested when at the very beginning of the story a new colonel is brought in, and the colonel essentially is there to lead the army and defeat the Kandarians. Although no one really thinks that they will be able to do that, it seems like a little bit of a suicide mission. No one really feels that they have the power to take over the Kandarians, but this new colonel seems to think that he does know what he's going to do, and Marcus is faced with having to negotiate between the colonel and the army and try and see the best of both worlds for each party. So he's put in a little bit of a predicament. The new colonel is called Janus. Janus is a very interesting character because he's highly intelligent, or maybe slightly mad. No one really knows whether he's just very, very intelligent and above all of them in terms of being able to think about tactics, or if he's actually completely insane and they are following a madman. So it's quite an interesting progression of his character, and we have a lot of characters who doubt him throughout the book, and we have to try and figure out whether we think he is a very intelligent leader or whether we think he's just insane. Marcus is definitely very unsure about how to react to this new chain of command, and over the course of the book we see him having to deal with different sides of the argument. We see him dealing with the things that Janus is saying to him and trying to pass them along to the main regiments in the army, and we also see the main regiments of the army and the commanders coming to him and saying, look, there's problems, we need to sort this out, and he has to try and relay that back to Janus. So it's quite a tricky situation he's in, for sure. I really enjoyed seeing Marcus's take on the situation. He gave us a really interesting perspective to read from, and there were multiple moments within this book where I felt like he was put in a really impossible situation, and I don't know what I would have done in that situation, but he had to make some snap decisions about whether to look after a friend or whether to support the army generally. It's an impossible situation that he was put in a couple of times, and I enjoyed seeing his dilemma and seeing what he chose to do and the results of what he chose to do, because they weren't always good. He didn't always make the right choice necessarily. I also really enjoyed getting to know his backstory, because at first glance he seems like a kind of typical grizzled commander, but of course there is a lot more to him than just that, and as we go through we get to see a little bit of his backstory, we get to see some of his feelings about the characters around him, and I really enjoyed that. He's an interesting character who grew on me, because at first I didn't like him as much as the other main character, but as the story went on, I definitely felt like they were kind of level pegging, and there were moments of his storyline that I was really interested in and hooked. Winter is a soldier in the army, as I said before, but she is actually masquerading as a male. You find this out very early on, so it's not a spoiler. It also says it on the blurb. And she's masquerading as a male soldier to A, get into the army, but B, mainly to escape her past, because she's been through some horrible things and she doesn't want to go back to that life. She's a very conscientious and aware soldier. She's very good at assessing her situation and making sure she's in the best scenario she can be, and she's also quite intelligent. She knows a few different languages, but she has a rather sad backstory, as I say, which haunts her wherever she goes. I felt like her character was one that I could instantly connect with, and I found her a very enjoyable character to read about right from the start. I was instantly intrigued by the predicaments that she was put in and the situations that she faced, being a girl masquerading as a boy. Obviously there's always going to be problems that come with that. I felt like her storyline was brilliantly told, and I had a few moments whilst I was reading it where I thought I knew what was going to happen next, and I thought, oh, you know, she's going to get discovered now or something like that. I was so wrong. things didn't go the way I thought they would, or things happened at the complete different time that I thought they would. Yeah, I couldn't guess where this was going. It had a lot of really interesting twists, and I very, very much enjoyed seeing that and seeing the way that those were integrated into the story in a really interesting way at the right moments. I just felt like the pacing of this book and the storyline of this book was really intriguing. I also loved seeing her character develop, because as we go through the story, she takes on a more advanced role. She definitely has to learn her situation and her job on the go, because there's no one really to teach her what to do. And she has great resourcefulness, which I very much appreciated, because it meant she wasn't just flailing around in certain situations. She actually had a plan, and whether that plan stuck to the manual of what to do in a certain situation or not, she did it, and she did it to the best of her ability, which I liked a lot. The magic in this book is handled really well. As I say, there isn't a lot of magic, but when we see it, it's very, very powerful, it's very interesting, and there's a lot of mystery to it. The idea of the magic, which we learn about a lot more towards the end of the book, is really, really intriguing. It is something I haven't heard a lot of before, and I very much enjoyed the ideas that he brought into the story, and I think it's going to be a massive part of the story as it goes on. So I'm really, really intrigued about seeing and learning a lot more about that. There also are some LGBT themes within this book, which I really enjoyed, because that is something we don't see a lot of in fantasy, and I was actually asked the other day by someone if there were LGBT themes in Malazan, and I couldn't really say yes, because maybe they're kind of hinted at, but not really. Whereas this book definitely has some, not explicit, but very strongly hinted at lesbian themes and scenes. If you're interested in that sort of thing, if you're interested in reading a fantasy that does have some elements of that, definitely give this one a go. It's not a major part of the story, it doesn't affect the overall story in a massive way, but it is to do with one of our characters, and it was quite an interesting backstory arc to this story, so I very much enjoyed learning a little bit about that as well. And it was quite a refreshing thing to see it in a fantasy story for once. On the whole, this was a very, very satisfying book, and I really enjoyed it. I felt like it was very, very well written, the battle was handled great, and the story was interesting with great characters. I really, really would recommend that you guys pick this up if you want to try getting into Flintlock fantasy and you've not been able to yet, or you haven't tried this one. I would highly recommend it. I would say it's a very, very good realisation of a story that uses flintlock guns and things like that, and it just is very, very well integrated into the story. 4.5 stars from me. I would love to know what you guys thought of it. If you've read it, definitely leave me your comments. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you all very, very soon in another video. Bye! Me and you gonna have a little chat about the